Так, нас должно быть хорошо сейчас слышно. Уважаемые коллеги, как нас слышно онлайн? Вот здесь очно очень хорошо, замечательно, большая аудитория. Мы даже сидим где-то в президиуме. А как у нас с онлайн-участниками? Слышно ли нас? Хорошо ли нас видно? Anybody? Не слышно. Да, вот, Наталья Ростиславовна, спасибо большое. И мы как раз хотели бы на сессию да, как раз с доклада Натальи Ростиславовны, это Институт мировой литературы имени Горького. Наталья Ростиславовна является редким специалистом по театру Индии. И не только. И доклад, собственно говоря, посвящен очень интересной. Да, тема between two great traditions, the content and dating of Pariśiṣṭas. Ну, на русском, я думаю, что не нужно. Да, можно сказать.
First speaker in this subsection is Dr. Natalia Lidova. She specializes in Indian and has been specializing in this subject for many years. She works for the Gorky Institute of World Literature, the Russian Academy of Sciences, and she will speak about Pariśiṣṭas, which is, and the topic's name is Between Two Great Traditions, the content and dating of the Pariśiṣṭas.
Hello, dear colleagues. Did you see my screen?
Yes, everything.
Do you hear me properly? Hello?
Да, хорошо слышно и видно у нас во всяком случае.
Спасибо большое за возможность принять участие в этой конференции. Thank you very much indeed to everybody for the opportunity to participate in this conference. And my paper is between the two great traditions, content and dating of the Pariśiṣṭas. Pariśiṣṭas, the supplement or appendix to the Greek Sutras, constitute an independent cluster of ancient Indian literature. They are quite distributed among the various Vedic schools. Okay. The most voluminous group of 72, actually 79 Pariśiṣṭas belongs to the Atharva Veda tradition. Another rather large group is 24 Pariśiṣṭas ascribed to Katyayana, belongs to the Shukla Yajurveda. Only 3 texts represent the tradition of Krishna Yajurveda. 2 Pariśiṣṭas belong to the Samaveda and only 1 to the Rigveda. Pariśiṣṭas are very poorly studied. With few exceptions, they are not translated into any European language, while existing Sanskrit editions are imperfect and call for revision. However, the main problem is not concerned with their study, but with the fact that they are not reliably dated. This had been already highlighted in the beginning of 20th century by well-known Sanskrit scholar Keys. In his review of the publication of the Atharva Veda Pariśiṣṭas prepared by George Melville Bowling and Julius von Legelein, I quote, "The value of the Pariśiṣṭas is unhappily seriously diminished by the total uncertainty of their date." Dr. Kashikar, the well-known scholar of Vedic rituals, in his book A Survey of the Shukla Yajurveda Pariśiṣṭas writes, I quote, "In the absence of conclusive evidence, I could not fix the exact date or even comparative date of this text." Dr. Modoc, who wrote the voluminous book on the text and tradition of the Atharva Veda Pariśiṣṭas, believed that they obviously represent a composite text, being a collection of tracts presumably belonging to the different chronological periods. Modoc proposed several dates. He believed that, I quote, "one may not be far from the truth if one assigns the Atharva Veda Pariśiṣṭas to a period somewhere around about the beginning of the Christian era." He also considers that, I quote, "the date of the compilation of the Atharva Veda Pariśiṣṭas lies somewhere between 2nd century BC and 5th century AD. At the same time, Modoc does not exclude the possibility that the date of the Atharva Veda Pariśiṣṭas could in some cases go back much earlier, and suggests that at least, I quote, "some text of this corpus could belong to the period of the 3rd or 4th century BC. The problem of dating is acute not only for the Atharva Veda Pariśiṣṭas, but for all ancillary literature. It was also discussed by Dutch scholar Peter Nicholas Hartin, who selected, edited, and translated 19 chapters of Bodhayana Grihya Shesha Sutra, which, along with Bodhayana Grihya Paribhasha Sutra, represents an important appendix, Pariśiṣṭa, to the Bodhayana Grihya Sutra. In the introduction to his book, Hartin writes, I quote, "The object of this edition is to call attention to some hitherto neglected material for the study of the period in the religious history of India about which comparatively little is known, namely the period of transition from Brahmanism into Hinduism. For knowledge of the philosophical aspect of Brahmanism and Hinduism, the texts which were edited and translated here has little or no value, but they do help us to understand better the development of the liturgy of early Hinduism. In the text of Bodhayana, we find old Brahmanism and new Hinduism combined. Putting forth the assumption that Bodhayana Grihya Shesha Sutra reflected the period of transition from Brahmanism to Hinduism, Hartin had to approach the problem of dating the text he was investigating. If the appendix under discussion demonstrates the development of what Hartin calls the liturgy of early Hinduism, then the dating should be early enough, going back to the middle of the 1st millennium BC, when, as Harting points out with reference to Dr. Bhandarkar, the cult of Vasudeva already existed, which, I quote, "must be as old as Panini and may be of the same period as Buddhism and Jainism." However, Harding did not find sufficient arguments to substantiate such early dating. First, he himself believed that, I quote, Puja itself may not be of very old date. And second, the ritual, I quote, described in the Baudhana is practically the same as that is used in the Puranas. Although, I quote, this method of worship may have existed a very long time before it was incorporated in the Puranas. As a result, Harding concluded that, I quote, puja and the mantras used in it may be pre-Christian for all we know. On the same hand, if anybody cares to argue that these chapters are of the 7th century or even later, I cannot refute this. In these circumstances, I consider it impossible to formulate any opinion concerning the age of the Greek Pariśiṣṭas Sutras and other Pariśiṣṭas. Since the Harding's publication appeared more than 100 years ago, little bit changed in the uncertainty of dating the Vedic ancillary literature. The latest attempt to discuss the question of the dating of Baudhana, Grihya Shesha Sutra, and the Pariśiṣṭa literature in general was made by the American scholar Timothy Lubin, who devoted several recently published articles to the Baudhana Grihya Sutra. In his paper towards a new edition of the Baudhana Grihya Sutra, Lubin gives an overview of the current state of research of the text. I quote, some observations about the form and content of the sutra are adduced to support the view that even if the Baudhana Grihya Sutra were one of the first Grihya Sutras to be composed, the form in which it is attested today shows many signs of relative lateness. Nevertheless, in this paper, he expresses his opinion concerning the dating of the Baudhana Grihya Shesha Sutra and Baudhana Grihya Paribhasha Sutra very cautiously. The fascinating appendices to the Baudhana Grihya Sutra deserves much more study on their own right. Although undateable in strict terms, the contents of the Baudhana Grihya Paribhasha Sutra and Baudhana Grihya Shesha Sutra, the latter comprising more than half of the Grihya material, are surely of various ages, in most, though not all, cases later than the Baudhana Grihya Sutra proper. They expand upon and provide more detailed prescriptions for rites presented in the Baudhana Grihya Sutra and provide a rubric for many other rites, such as the cult of images of Rudra and Vishnu. However, in another paper published in the same year, Lubin dates Baudhana Grihya Shesha Sutra with greater precision by stating that, I quote, the Baudhana Grihya Sutra with its lengthy later editions has still not been studied adequately. This corpus, if more heterogeneous and wilder than the canons of other Vedic schools, reveals more clearly than the steps by which Vedic ritualists set upon forging a flexible, broad-based religion that retained a palpable connection with the old Vedic cult. The Grihya Sutra of the Baudhana school is the longest of the genre, especially if we include in later extensions Paribhasha Sutra and the Shesha or Pariśiṣṭas Sutra. Like the appendices to other Grihya Sutras, the various chapters of the Shesha probably were added well into the middle of the first millennium CE. The dating of Pariśiṣṭas, the middle of the first millennium CE or AD, has been previously proposed. Some scholars, for example, Peter Bishop and Arlo Griffiths, who published and translated of Atharva Veda Pariśiṣṭa 40, dated this text even later and assumed that Atharva Veda Pariśiṣṭas in general belonged to, I quote, to sometime in the second half of the first millennium CE. Since the Pariśiṣṭa, as it was already mentioned, are indeed very poorly studied, and their cultural and historical context is unclear, the dating to the middle of the first millennium AD remains problematic, although it might be in some point become widely accepted in Indological scholarship. If this happens, the Pariśiṣṭas will be associated with the Gupta era or even much more later periods. While it might be quite true for some of the Pariśiṣṭas that date the whole corpus of Vedic ancillary literature to the middle of the first millennium AD does not seem to be well grounded. Thus, having insufficient grounds for dating the Pariśiṣṭas, it seems reasonable to avoid any generalizations to the use of a single day for the whole corpus. Most likely, the Pariśiṣṭas were created by different authors at different periods of time, so there are a number of options to choose from them in attempting to determine their precise times of formation. In order to use the text and rely on it, we have to discuss not only the date of the fixations of the Pariśiṣṭas text, but also the era in which a particular content could have appeared or been added to the work. At the same time, it should be pointed out that the dating of Pariśiṣṭas is based almost exclusively on the content of the texts themselves, since the external data are not helpful in this case. While the Pariśiṣṭas contain useful information on magic, astronomy, and grammar, their importance for the study of the ritual must be considered the most crucial one. Pariśiṣṭas preserve evidence for a fundamental shift in ritual paradigm, making the moment when the ancient Vedic ritual called yajna was first supplemented and eventually supplanted by the new Hindu ritual of puja. Many years ago, Harting observes in his above-mentioned monographs that, I quote, "The chapters of Baudhayana are not for the first place remarkable because they show the Puranic mode of worship, but because they show this mode of worship blended with granted upon the old Brahmanic ritual, which we find in explained at length in the Grihya Sutra of Baudhayana." Harting was the first who proposed the idea that some chapters of Baudhayana Grihya Shesha Sutra represent one of the earliest detailed description of puja. His opinion was supported by Jan Gonda in his work 1970 and later accepted and shared by Gudrun Buneman, who wrote a well-known book on Smarta Puja. Buneman shared Harting's opinion that this, I quote, "important appendix to the Baudhayana Grihya Sutra shows the Hindu ritual at an early stage mixed up with Vedic ritual." It is legitimate to ask at this point what actually defines early forms of Hindu ritual and what historic period should be seen at its cradle. Puja is commonly considered as the principal ritual of Hinduism, while in fact it was the main ritual of all three post-Vedic religions, that is Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. We know that a description of a ritual with this name cannot be found in any work of the Vedic era. In the puja ritual, if the puja ritual existed in Vedic time at all, it was on the periphery of the Aryan world and was totally marginal to it. At the same time, the root puj is undoubtedly ancient and was recorded already in the Rig Veda, in the hymn 8:17-12, where the name Shachi Pujana, literally honoring of by the power, is mentioned. The reference to the puja as a ritual became more frequent around the middle of the first millennium BC in the text of late Vedic and early post-Vedic eras. This word occurs twice in the Shatapatha Brahmana, once in the Greek Chandogya Upanishad, and many times in different contexts in Apastamba, Bodhayana, and Gauta Dharma Sutras. In early Buddhist texts, puja as a form of veneration is repeatedly mentioned in Sutta Nipata, in Digha Majjhima and Samyutta Nikayas, in Dhammapada, and among more reliably dated sources in the edicts of King Ashoka, in particularly in the 12th edict from Girnar. The fact can be have only one explanation. Although the root puj existed in the Vedic time, it was absolutely alien to the Vedic society. It is important that two linguistic forms, the noun and the verb, with the meaning of honor and to worship, were well known to Panini's predecessor, Grammarian Yaska, dated 6th or 5th century BC, the author of the treatise called Nirukta on etymology and semantic of Sanskrit words. The context in which Yaska mentions the word puja suggests that he was familiar not only with notion, but also with practice of the ritual it defined. And examples would be Nirukta 226, which states, I quote, "Pani hand is derived from the root pan, meaning to worship. They worship gods having folded their hands." Another example is Nirukta 5:14, where it is said, "Water is called Pushkaram because it is a means of worship or to be worshipped." In both cases, Yaska referred to distinct features of the actual ritual of the puja type, namely to use of water in worship of gods for sprinkling and bathing, and of a special gesture of the hand folded together, known as Anjali Mudra, and widely used in the practice of contemporary puja and yoga. Panini's grammar Ashtadhyayi, 5th or 4th century BC, also contains several sutras offering various rules of word formation employing the root puj, alongside scattering references to the realities of the Hindu cult. Moreover, Patanjali's 2nd century BC commentary on Panini's Sutra 5.399, Jivikarthicipanya, allows us to suggest that during the last centuries BC, India witnessed the spread of the cult, a distinctive feature of which was the ritualistic use of the images or symbols of gods. A number of material evidence that can be preserved from the time also confirms the existence of a developed cult of images. In my opinion, the study of the puja cult requires fundamental work not only in the period when puja was already a widespread and established ritual performed in temples in front of the images of gods, but also thorough investigation of the pivotal era around the middle of the first millennium BC, when puja was being introduced as part of religious life in the Aryan society. The works of Yaska and Panini and some other texts which can be dated back to the middle of the first millennium BC, as well as edicts of King Ashoka, testifies to the existence of puja for at least 1,000 years before the Gupta era, i.e. a period in which the Pariśiṣṭas are now more and more often attributed. It is hard to imagine that such a significant period of time is not reflected in any way in the Pariśiṣṭas, if we are to accept them as the earliest source for the cult of puja. Thus, we are faced with a simple choice. either the Pariśiṣṭas are not the source containing the earliest detailed description of puja, or they should not be dated to the Gupta time, but to a much earlier period. At the same time, of course, we should also be aware that the time of appearance of the Pariśiṣṭa text might not fully coincide with the emergence of the ritual tradition itself. But this is a topic for another paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Наталья Ростиславовна, можно отключить презентацию?
Да,
Ага.
я это делаю.
Спасибо большое за очень интересный доклад. Может быть, какие-то вопросы? Any questions, comments? Ага. Так, вопросов пока никаких нет. Тогда мы приступаем к следующему докладу. Огромное спасибо, Наталья Ростиславовна, за то, что вы почтили нас своим докладом.
Спасибо, что
Да,
пригласили. Это
Спасибо.
было, правда, очень приятно.
Спасибо. А тут появился вопрос. Наталья Ростиславовна, вопрос.
Yes, so welcome.
Мгм. Сейчас, секундочку.
Was introduced in the first millennium BC, and still it is not reflected in the Pariśiṣṭas. So that is my question. Why? So is it possible that the Pariśiṣṭas wanted the oldest Vedic style of worship and not the modern one? Is it just my thinking on that?
So the question, should I translate it to Russian? Нужно перевести на русский или?
Я думаю, да, не слышно, наверное, было, да?
Yes, I don't heard the question properly. It's...
На английском кратше.
Well, the question is about puja mentioned. So you say that, and is it possible that the Pariśiṣṭas reflect a more ancient Vedic tradition, a more ancient Vedic way of worship?
Do you hear me?
Am I correct? Перевести на русский?
Нет, дело в том, что я не слышала половину вопроса. Если я правильно поняла, то нужно ответить на вопрос, являлась ли пуджа ведийским видом поклонения или нет.
Не совсем. Вопрос заключается в том, что вы сказали, что пуджа появилась в первом тысячелетии только новой эры, а Pariśiṣṭas не упоминает по этому пуджу. Вот и участница хочет получить комментарий по этому поводу, и также она хочет уточнить, не является ли свидетельством того, что Pariśiṣṭas следует более старой ведийской системе поклонения.
Thank you very much for this question. You see, actually in my paper, I tried to propose absolutely different idea. First point that puja was not a Vedic ritual, and it's not mentioned and not described in any text of Vedic era. And we know very well that Vedic ritual is yajna type. And the main issue here is that these two rituals, yajna and puja, they realize absolutely different religious and ritualistic archetypes. One is cult of images, and another is a cult of Agni. And the difference is quite substantial because if we use images, we can bring palpable, physically attested gift. but to gods, because gods present in front of us. And if we use Agni, we should destroy our offering and present this invisible gift to invisible gods. So we don't have, this is first point, we don't have any single mention of the ritual, and we don't have any description of the ritual in the text of Vedic era, I mean Puja type. It's appeared in the middle of the first millennium BC. It is many ideas from where and how. One of the idea was proposed Charpentier in the 19th and the beginning of 20th century, that it's not Aryan word and Aryan ritual, but was borrowed from Tamil or South Indian tradition. In any case, Pariśiṣṭas provides us not only the name of the ritual, but description, and description of this ritual on the very early stage of its development. It is absolutely clear. And I can provide a lot of ritualistic details, but unfortunately I don't have time for this. But I can, I have a paper which was published in Oxford collection of Hindu practices. And the name of this paper, Measuring Innovation, the Early Cult of Puja. So if you're interested in this point, you can easily find it, as I know it's available on Oxford websites, and see, check my argumentation on this point. Hello?
Correct. Connected. Connected.
Наталья Ростиславовна, коллега
Да.
хочет с вами потом встречаться, уточнить какие-то вещи непосредственно уже напрямую с вами. Мы можем дать ваш контакт?
Да, пожалуйста, пожалуйста, конечно. Пожалуйста, я всегда буду рада, если чем-то могу.
Тогда мы